Hey guys, it's reading day, and in honor of the 4th of July, I'll be reading from Women of the American Revolution. We'll be right back. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Good evening, everybody. How's everybody doing? Happy Tuesday. Second day of July, right? Yeah, my name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you need paranormal service, or you think you have something paranormal going on in your home or office, we can get to you. It might take us a couple days because California is like really huge. People don't realize how big we are. We could like break off and be our own country. That's how big we are. But in the case that we can't get out there right away, we do have psychics on staff who can help you and direct you in the right direction. And in most cases, let me up my sound a little bit. In most cases, they, okay, I'm just trying to keep the AC sound down a little bit too. In most cases, they can do something remotely and calm the energy down until we get out there. It usually only takes us 1 or 2 days to get out there. So that's the, that's our MO. So yeah, we will definitely get out there. If you're watching from Facebook today, and a lot of you are, please feel free to follow if you haven't done so already. And if you like and see what you hear tonight, hit us with some thumbs up, happy faces, hearts, just things to show that you like it. Also, chat amongst yourselves in the chat room. And what that does is that puts us up higher in the FYP, which is the For You page on Facebook. You know, when you're on your Facebook page and you go and you look down, you scroll down, and you see these things come up of different people that they suggest for you to see, that is the For You page. That's the For You stuff. And that's where we'll pop out because, we all know that this is all about sharing, getting the word out about the show. So that's how they do it. That's how we do it. And it works like that all the way across for any internet thing, especially YouTube. Okay, YouTube, let's talk about YouTube real quick. If you haven't subscribed, please do so. We've got more than 1,000 videos sitting over there, all of this show, all different topics. I'm a journalist, photojournalist. I like to cover different topics. And so you'll see that. And like I said, there's 1,000 over there. When you initially go over there to check it out, it's unnerving because there's just so much there. I get a headache. So what I've done is started to take everything and put them into individual files so you can find them easier. So if you're into cryptids, click on the cryptid file, go in there, you can pick whatever show you want, whatever guest you want. If you're into medium Nancy Matz, it works the same way. So you'll be able to pick and choose. And again, if you haven't subscribed already, please feel free to do so. Same rules apply like for the show. Give us a thumbs up. That was weird, I dropped off, but we're back. Give us a thumbs up, your happy faces, those heart things, and talk amongst yourselves in the chat room. And that will help us get up in the FYP. And we're also broadcasting tonight on Twitch. Same thing, same rules, okay? So like I said, anywhere you go, TikTok or whatever, that's how it works. And it's all about sharing, And if there's somebody in the house, maybe that's just cooking or something for the 4th, you guys are prepping for the 4th, or doing whatever. I know Friday night, I got Carrie go over to the house for Pamela because she was going on vacation, and so she was cleaning house, so I got to vacuum, and I got to go in the kitchen, I got to do all this stuff with her while I was in her pocket. So it's kind of fun, carry me around. But if there is someone in the house that you think might be interested in the show, say, hey, there's this little show out of Sacramento, and I listen to it and watch it, and I think you might be interested in watching too, right? So that's the way we do it. All right, well, tonight I'm doing something a little different. It's Tuesday, and of course the 4th of July is Thursday, and so I wanted to kind of do something in dedication to the 4th of July. And I know a lot of my audience is from Great Britain and Europe and stuff, and so I was trying to find something like in between to do so that I didn't offend anybody or anything with this. But I kept coming back to the same book, and the book is The Women of the American Revolution by Elizabeth F. Ellet. And the book was written in 1900. Okay, so what's cool about this book? I'm going to read the intro to you, which is written by someone else. But the people that she talks about in this book were still alive. And so she got to talk about, she got to talk about like people like Martha Washington and people like that, that meant something to the American, women that meant something to the American Revolution here in the United States. So it should be an interesting book. And like I said, I don't want to offend anybody over in Great Britain because I know we've got a good following over there, or anywhere in Europe or France or anything like that. So just bear with me. It's just going to be reading today, and then I'll be reading from it on the 4th of July, and then we'll just kind of settle down with it. But I just want to do something kind of patriotic for America here. And I have the utmost respect for Great Britain. Okay, I have the utmost respect. You're an ally, and I have the utmost respect for Great Britain. In fact, I have cousins and family over in England, so I have a lot of respect for you guys. And shit happens, right? I just said the word. It happens. Okay, so let me get started on this. And again, the book is by Elizabeth F. Ellet, and it's called Women of the American Revolution. And so there's going to be an introduction written by another writer. And let me see if I can see who that writer is right now. Let me pull this up. And the writer is, let me go back a little bit on this, and then I'll come back in for you guys. Okay, contents, introduction, preface. I don't see, it's not telling me who it's written by. Okay, let me get on here. Here we go. And introduction written by Anne Hollingsworth Wharton. So we're going to go ahead and read the introduction and get this thing started. I will read for about an hour tonight, and then I will be back to read again on the 4th of July. So here we go. Introduction. When Mrs. Ellet compiled her history of the women of the Revolution, she could not have foreseen the deep interest in colonial and revolutionary history that was destined to mark the last decade of the 19th century. Nor could she have realized that the various patriotic societies that were to be organized among women would lead to as great an interest in the lives of the mothers as in those of the fathers of the Republic. Yet, the writer of these sketches of noted women has prepared for just such a phase of American life, which makes her work now appear a prophecy of the future as well as a summary of past events. The Women of the Revolution, having been published in the middle of the century, the material for these biographical sketches was collected while some men and women were still living who could recall the faces and figures of the statesmen and soldiers of the revolutionary struggle. When the sketch of Mrs. Philip Schuyler went to press, the daughter of the heroic lady was still living in Washington and able to relate for the entertainment of her friends stirring incidents of her mother's life and of her own life in camp with Mrs. Washington, when, as Miss Betsy Schuyler, she won the heart of the general's young aide-de-camp, the brilliant, versatile Hamilton. Another interesting character who was living while Mrs. Ellet's work was in, of course, preparation, was Mrs. Gerard G. Beekman, whose mind was a storehouse of revolutionary incidents and adventures, of many of which she was herself the heroine or an eyewitness. There are in these volumes many proofs that Mrs. Ellet availed herself of the opportunities afforded her to draw from original sources. In some instances, the author acknowledged her indebtedness to the rich fields of reminiscence in which it was her privilege to glean. In other passages, the result of such gleaning is evident from the minuteness and the vividness with which she has portrayed certain characters and depicted the scenes and circumstances in which they moved. In the opening paragraph of the sketch of Martha Wilson of New Jersey, Mrs. Ellet speaks of the valuable fund of recollection that was opened to her through familiar association with intimate friends on the subject of the biography. Mrs. Wilson, who lived through the first decade of the 19th century, recollected the stirring days of the Revolution when New Jersey was its principal battleground, and she, as the daughter of one of General Washington's officers and the wife of another, entertained at her father's house and in her own the commander-in-chief and other prominent revolutionary heroes. Mrs. Wilson was able to relate many conversations that were held at her table, and numerous personal incidents which threw light upon the characters of Washington, Wayne, Greene, and Knox, while the faces and voices of such foreign patriots as Pulaski and the Marquis de Lafayette were familiar to her as household words. An excellent characteristic of Mrs. Ellet's work is its comprehensiveness and breadth of view. She wrote not only of women who were prominent and the pivotal centers of action, but also of those whose homes in small inland towns or remote country places rendered them liable to dangers and depredations unknown to their sisters. more favorably situated in the larger cities and towns. We are wont to think of the trials and privations of the early settlement of our country as having been confined to the narrow strip along the Atlantic seaboard that once stood for colonial America, forgetting the dangers and vicissitudes of pioneer life in such borderlands as Kentucky, Ohio, and the western part of Virginia. Mrs. Ellet, in her chapters upon the women of the western states, draws a vivid picture of the heroism and endurance of these border settlers who were subjected to the successive forays of the Tories and Indians. And the intrepid, remember this is 1900, so Native Americans. I have to correct myself, so I got to watch myself when I'm reading. And the intrepid courage and virility of resource exhibited by the wives and daughters of some of the settlers, especially in the story of young Elizabeth Zane, we are confronted with a record of bravery that rivals that of such well-known heroines as Lydia Durack, Deborah Sampson, and the women of the Valley of Wyoming. Side by side with the sketches of women, however patriotic and highly placed in public and social life, were essentially domestic, as Martha Washington, Catherine Greene, Rebecca Biddle, and Sarah Bache. We find those of such women of letters as Elizabeth Ferguson of Pennsylvania, Mercy Warren and Abigail Adams of Massachusetts, and Anna Stockton of New Jersey. Here also are the biographies of women who were chiefly distinguished for beauty, wit, social charm, such as Dorothy Hancock, Rebecca Franks, Margaret Shippen, for without them, any picture of the life of the time would have been as incomplete as without the record of character as heroic as those of Rebecca Mott, Catherine Schuler, Cornelia Beekman, and Mary Slocum. In these 2 volumes of 650 pages, a vast amount of information of characterization, of incident, and anecdote have been preserved for the use of the historian and scholar, as well as for the pleasure and instruction of the casual reader. More than this, if, as Mr. Froude says, history is a voice forever sounding across the centuries, the laws of right and wrong, the reader of today may draw from the record of the lives of these women of yesterday lessons in courage, endurance, fidelity to principle, and unselfish devotion to their country that may well prove an inspiration to higher ideals of citizenship and broader patriotism in the future. Anne Hollingsworth Wharton, Philadelphia, June 15th, 1900. Here we go. Preface. In honoring this work to the public, it is due to the reader no less than the writer to say something of the extremely difficulty which has been found in obtaining material sufficiently reliable for a record designed to be strictly authentic. 3/4 of a century have necessarily effaced all recollection of many imposing domestic scenes of the Revolution, and cast over many a veil of obscurity through which it is hard to distinguish their features. Whatever has not been preserved by contemporaneous written testimony, or derived at an early period from immediate actors in the scenes, is liable to the suspicion of being distorted or discolored by the imperfect knowledge, the prejudices, or the fancy of its narrators. It is necessary always to distrust, and very often to reject traditionary information. Much of this character has been received from various sources, but I have refrained from using it in all cases where it was not supported by responsible personal testimony, or where it was found to conflict in any of its details with established historical facts. Inasmuch as political history says but little, and that vaguely and incidentally of the women who bore their part in the Revolution, the materials for a work treating of them, and their actions and sufferings must be derived in great part from private sources. The apparent dearth of information was at first almost disheartening. Except the letters of Mrs. Adams, no fair exponent of the feelings and trials of the women of the Revolution had been given to the public, for the letters of Mrs. Wilkinson afford but a limited view of a short period of the war. Of the Southern women, Mrs. Mott was the only one generally remembered in her own state for the act of magnanimity recording history, and in a few fragmentary anecdotes of female heroism to be found in Garden's collection, and some historical works completed the amount of published information on the subject. Letters of friendship and affection, those most faithful transcripts of the heart and mind of individuals, have been earnestly sought and examined wherever they could be obtained. But letter writing was far less usual among our ancestors than it is at the present day, and the uncertainty and sometimes the danger attendant upon the transmission of letters were not only an impediment to, to frequent correspondence, but excluded from that which did exist much discussion of the all-absorbing subjects of the time. Of the little that was written, too, how small a portion remains in this, as it has been truly called manuscript-destroying generation. But while much that might have illustrated the influence of women and the domestic character and feeling of those days had been lost or obscured by time, it appeared yet possible, by persevering effort, to recover something worthy of an enduring record. With the view of eliciting information for this purpose, application was made severely to the surviving relatives of women remarkable for position or influence, or whose zeal, personal sacrifices, or heroic acts had contributed to promote the establishment of American independence. My success in these applications has not been such as to enable me to fill out entirely my own idea of the work I wish to present to the reader. Some of the sketches are necessarily brief and meager, and perhaps few of them do full justice to their subjects. There is also inherent difficulty in delineating female character, which impresses itself upon the memory of those who have known the individual by delicate traits that may be felt but not described. The actions of men stand out in prominent relief, and are a safe guide in forming a judgment of them. A woman's sphere, on the other hand, is secluded, and in very few instances does her personal history, even though she may fill a conspicuous position, afford sufficient incident to throw a strong light upon her character. This want of salient points for description must be felt by all who have attempted a faithful portraiture of some beloved female relative. How much is the difficulty increased when a stranger essays a tribute to those who are no longer among the living, and whose existence was passed, for the most part, in a quiet round of domestic duties. It need scarcely be said that the deficiency of material has in no case been supplied by fanciful embellishment. These memoirs are a simple and homely narrative of real occurrences. Wherever details were wanting to fill out the picture, it has been left in outline for some more fortunate limner. No labor of research, no pains in investigation, and none but those who have been similarly engaged can estimate the labor, have been spared in establishing the truth of the statements. It can hardly be expected that inaccuracies have been altogether avoided in a work where the facts have to be drawn from numerous and sometimes conflicting authorities, but errors, if discovered, may be hereafter corrected. The sketches contained in this first volume, illustrating progressive stages of the war, are arranged with some observance of chronological order, while those in the second do not admit of such a distribution. Many authorities, including nearly all of the books upon the Revolution, have been consulted, and references made to those to which I am under special obligations. For the memoir of Mrs. Bache, B-A-C-H-E, I am indebted to the pen of Mr. William Duane of Philadelphia, and for that of Mrs. Allen. To Mr. Henry R. Schoolcraft of Washington, my grateful acknowledgments are due also to Mr. Jacob B. Moore, librarian of the New York Historical Society, for valuable advice and for facilities afforded me in the examination of books and manuscripts under his charge, and to Dr. Joseph Johnson, the Reverend James H. Say, and the Honorable Judge O'Neill of South Carolina, who have obligingly aided me in the collection of authentic particulars connected with the war in that state. Others have rendered valuable assistance in the same way, and in affording me an opportunity of examining family papers in their possession. To them all, and to those numerous friends who have encouraged me by their sympathy and kind wishes in this arduous but interesting task, I offer most heartfelt thanks. If the work whose progress they have cherished should be deemed a useful contribution to American history, they will be no less gratified than myself that its design has been accomplished. EFE. Alright, I'm going to do a quick enlarge here, you guys, for me, so I can see. I gotta watch the clock here. Okay. So here we go. The women of the American Revolution. All Americans are accustomed to view, with interest and admiration, the events of the Revolution. Its scenes are vivid in their memory, and its prominent actors are regarded with the deepest veneration. But while the leading spirits are thus honored, attention should be directed to the source whence their power was derived, to the sentiment pervading the mass of the people. The force of this sentiment working in the public heart cannot be measured because, amidst the abundance of materials for the history of action, there is little for that of the feeling of those times. And, as years pass on, the investigation becomes more and more difficult. Yet, it is both interesting and important to trace its operation. It gave statesmen their influence and armed heroes for victory. What could they have done but for the home sentiment to which they appealed, and which sustained them in the hour of trial and success? Those were thus aided to the eminence they gained through toils and perils. Others may claim a share in the merit, if not the fame. Excuse me, my allergies. The unfading laurels that wreathe their brows had their root in the hearts of the people, and were nourished with their lifeblood. The feeling which wrought the powerfully in the community depended, in a great part, upon the women. It is always thus in times of popular excitement. Who can estimate, moreover, the controlling influence of the early culture? During the years of the progress of British encroachment and colonial discontent, when the sagacious politician could discern the portentous shadow of events yet far distant, there was time for the nurture and the domestic sanctuary of the love of civil liberty, which afterwards kindled into a flame and shed light on the world. The talk of matrons in American homes was of people's wrongs and the tyranny that oppressed them, till the sons who had grown to manhood, with strengthened aspirations towards a better state of things, and views enlarged to comprehend their invaded rights, stood up prepared to defend them to the utmost. Patriotic mothers nursed the infancy of freedom. Their counsels and their prayers mingled with the deliberations that resulted in a nation's assertion of its independence. They animated the courage and confirmed the self-devotion of those who ventured only the common cause. They frowned upon instances of coldness or backwardness, and in the period of deepest gloom cheered and urged onward the desponding. They willingly shared inevitable dangers and privations, relinquished without regret prospects of advantage to themselves, and parted with those they loved better than life, not knowing when they were to meet again. It is almost impossible now to appreciate the vast influence of women's patriotism upon the destinies of the infant republic. We have no means of showing the important part she bore in maintaining the struggle, and in laying the foundations on which so mighty and majestic a structure has been. History can do it no justice, for history deals with the workings of the head rather than the heart, and the knowledge received by tradition of the domestic manners and social character of the times is too imperfect to furnish a show index. We can only dwell upon the individual instances of magnanimity, fortitude, self-sacrifice, and heroism, bearing the impress of the feeling of revolutionary days, indicative of a spirit which animated all, and to which, in its various and multiform exhibitions, we are not less indebted for national freedom than to the swords of the patriots who poured out their blood. "'Tis true, Clinder," says a writer in one of the papers of the day, "no mean merit will accrue to him who shall celebrate the virtues of our ladies. Shall not their generous contributions to relieve the wants of the defenders of our country supply a calm to emulate the Roman women, stripped of their jewels when the public necessity demanded them? Such tributes were often called forth by the voluntary exertions of the American women. Their patriotic sacrifices were made with an enthusiasm that showed the earnest spirit ready on every occasion to appear in generous acts. Some gave their own property, and went from house to house to solicit contributions for the army. Colors were embroidered by fair hands, and pressed and presented with the charge never to desert them. And arms and ammunition were provided by the same liberal zeal. They formed themselves into associations renouncing the use of teas and other imported luxuries, and engaging to card, spin, and weave their own clothing. And Mecklenburg and Rowan counties, North Carolina, Young ladies of the most respectable families pledged themselves not to receive the addresses of any suitors who had not obeyed the country's call for military service. New Jersey Gazette, October 11th, 1780. The needy shared the fruit of their industry and economy. They visited hospitals daily, sought the dungeons of the provost, and the crowded holds of prison ships, and provisions were carried from their stores to the captives, whose only means of recompense was the blessing of those who were ready to perish. Excuse me, God, my allergies. Jeez, okay. Many raised grain, gathered it, made bread, and carried it to their relatives in the army or in prisons, accompanying the supply with exhortations never to abandon the cause of their country. The burial of friends slain in battle or chance encounters often devolved upon them, and even enemies would not have received the sepulchre without the service of their hands. When the resources of the country scarcely allowed, the scantiest supply of clothing and provisions, and British cruisers on the East Coast destroyed every hope of aid from merchant vessels, when, to the distressed troops, their cup of misfortune seemed full to overflowing, and there appeared no prospect of relief, except from the benevolence of their fellow citizens. When even the ability of these was almost exhausted by repeated applications, then it was that the women of Pennsylvania and New Jersey, by their zealous exertions and willing sacrifices, accomplished what had been thought impossible. Not only was the pressure of want removed, but the sympathy and favor of the fair daughters of America, says one of the journals, operated like a charm on the soldier's heart, gave vigor to exertion, confidence to his hopes of success, and the ultimate certainty of victory and peace. General Washington, in his letter of acknowledgment to the Committee of Ladies, says, "The Army ought not to regret its sacrifices or its sufferings when they meet with so flattering a reward, as in the sympathy of your sex. Nor can it fear that its interests will be neglected when espoused by advocates as powerful as they are amiable." An officer in camp writes in June 1780, "The patriotism of the women of their city is a subject of conversation with the army. Had I poetical genius, I would sit down and write an ode of praise to it." Bergie Owen, who on his first coming to America, boasted that he would dance with the ladies and coax them into submission, must now have a better understanding of the good sense of public spirit of our females. And I keep hitting them. Sorry. And he has already heard of the fortitude and inflexible temper of our men. Another observes, "We cannot appeal in vain for what is good to that sanctuary to where all that is good has its proper home, the female bosom." How the influence of women was estimated by John Adams appears from one of his letters to his wife. Quote, "I think I have sometimes observed to you in conversation that upon examining the biography of illustrious men, you will generally find some female about them, in the relation of mother or wife or sister, to whose instigation a great part of their merit is to be ascribed. You will find a curious example of this in the case of Aspasia, the wife of Pericles. She was a woman of the greatest beauty and the first genius. She taught him, it is said, his refined maxims of policy, his lofty imperial eloquence, nay, even composed the speeches on which so great a share of his reputation was founded. I wish some of our great men had such wives. By the account in your last letter, it seems the women in Boston begin to think of themselves able to serve their country. What a pity it is that our generals in the northern districts had not Aspasias to their wives. I believe the two Howes have not very great women for wives. If they had, we should suffer more from their exertions than we do. This is our good fortune. A smart wife would have put Howe in possession of Philadelphia a long time ago. The venerable Major Spaulding of Georgia writes in reply to an application to him for information respecting the revolutionary women of his state, "I am a very old man, and have read as much as one I know. Yet I have never known and never read of one, no, not one, who did not owe high standing or a great name to his mother's blood or his mother's training. My friend Randolph said he owed everything to his mother. Mr. Jefferson's mother was a Randolph, and he acknowledged that he owed everything to her rearing. Trevor Washington, we all know, attributed everything to his mother. Lord Bacon attributed much to his mother's training. And will anyone doubt, even Alexander believed he owed more to the blood and lofty ambitions of Olympia than to the wisdom of the cunning of Philip? The sentiments of the women towards the brave defenders of their native land were expressed in an address widely circulated at the time, and read in the churches of Virginia. Quote, "We know," it says, "that at a distance from the theater of war, if we enjoy any tranquillity, it is the fruit of your watchings, your labors, your dangers. And shall we hesitate to evince to you our gratitude? Shall we hesitate to wear clothing more simple and dress less elegant, while at the price of this small privation we shall deserve your benedictions?" The same spirit appears in a letter found among some papers belonging to a lady of Philadelphia. It was addressed to a British officer in Boston and written before the Declaration of Independence. The following extract will show its character. "I will tell you what I've done. My only brother I have sent to the camp with my prayers and blessings. I hope he will not disgrace me. I am confident he will behave with honor and emulate the great examples he has before him. And had I 20 sons and brothers that should go, I have retrenched my every superfluous expense in my table and family tea, and I have not drunk since last Christmas, nor bought a new cap or gown since your defeat at Lexington. And, what I never did before, have learned to knit, and am now making stockings of American wool for my servants. And this way do I throw in my mite to the public good. I know this, that as free I can die but once, but as a slave I shall not be worthy of life. I have the pleasure to assure you that these are the sentiments of all my sister Americans. They have sacrificed assemblies, parties, and pleasure, tea drinking, and finery, to that great spirit of patriotism that actuates all degrees of people throughout this expensive continent. If these are the sentiments of females, what must glow in the breasts of our husbands, brothers, and sons? They are, as with one heart, determined to die or be free. It is not a quibble in politics, a science which few understand, that we are contending for. It is this plain truth which the most ignorant peasant knows, and is clear to the weakest capacity, that no man has a right to take their money without their consent. You say you are no politician. Oh, sir, it requires no Machiavellian head to discover this tyranny and oppression. It is written with a sunbeam. Everyone will see and know it, because it will make everyone feel, and we shall be unworthy of the blessings of heaven if we ever submit to it. Heaven seems to smile upon us, for in the memory of man never were known such qualities of flocks and sheep without number. We are making power fast, and do not wait for ammunition, or do not want for ammunition. From all the portions of the country, thus arose the expression of women's ardent zeal. Under accumulated evils, the manly spirit that alone could secure success might have sunk, but for the firmness and intrepidity of the weaker sex. It supplied every persuasion that could animate to perseverance and secure fidelity. The noble deeds in which this impressionable spirit breathed itself were not unrewarded by persecution. The case of the Quakeress Deborah Franklin, who was banished from New York by the British commandment for her liberality in relieving the sufferings of the American prisoners, was one among many. In our days of tranquility and luxury, imagination can scarcely compass the extent of severity of the trials endured, and it is proportionately difficult to estimate the magnanimity that bore all, not only with uncomplaining patience, but with a cheerful forgetfulness of suffering in view of the desired object. The alarms of war, the roar of the strife itself, could not silence the voice of women, lifted in encouragement or in prayer. The horrors of battle or massacre cannot drive her from post of duty. The effect of this devotion cannot be questioned, though it may not now be traced in particular instances. These were, for the most part, known only to those who were themselves actors in the scenes, or who lived in the midst of them. The heroism of the revolutionary women has passed from remembrance with the generation who witnessed it, or is it seen only by faint and occasional glimpses through the gathering to render a measure of justice inadequate? It must be to a few of the American matrons whose names deserve to live in remembrance, and to exhibit something of the domestic side of the revolutionary picture, is the object of this work. As we recede from the realities of that struggle, it is regarded with increasing interest by those who enjoy its results, while the elements which were its life-giving principle, too subtle to be retained by the grave historian, are fleeting fast from apprehension. Yet, without some conception of them, the revolution cannot be appreciated. We must enter into the spirit as well as master the letter. While attempting to pay a tribute, but too long withheld, to the memory of women who did and endured so much in the cause of liberty, we should not be insensible to the virtues exhibited by another class, belonging equally to the history of the period. These had the share of reverse and suffering. Many saw their children and relatives espousing opposite sides, and with the ardent feelings of loyalty in their hearts, were forced to weep over the miseries of their families and neighbors. Many were driven from their homes, despoiled of property, and finally compelled to cast their lot in desolate wilds and an ungenial climate. And while their heroism, fortitude, and spirit of self-sacrifice were not less brightly displayed, their hard lot was unpitied, and they met with no reward. In the library of William H. Prescott, at his residence in Boston, are two swords, crossed above the arch of an alcove. One belonged to his grandfather, Colonel William Prescott, who commanded the American troops in the redoubt of Bunker Hill. The other was the sword of Captain Lindsay, of the Royal Navy, who commanded the British sloop of war, the Falcon, then lying in the Mystic, from which the American troops were fired upon as they crossed to Bunker Hill. Captain Lindsay was the grandfather of Mrs. Prescott. The swords of those two gallant soldiers who fought on different sides upon the memorable day, now in the possession of their united descendants, and crossed, an emblem of peace, in the library of the great American historian, are emblematic of the spirit in which our history should be written. Such be the spirit in which we view the loyalists of those days. Chapter 1, Mary Washington. The mother of Washington. There needs no eulogy to awaken the associations which cling around that sacred name. Our hearts do willing homage to the venerated parent of the chief. Quote, who mid his elements being wrought, with no uncertain alm nursing the germs of godlike virtue in his infant mind. End quote. The contemplation of Washington's character naturally directs attention to her whose maternal care guided and guarded his early years. What she did, and the blessing of a world that follows her, teach impressively, while showing the power of the duty of those who mold the characters of the age to come. The principles and conduct of this illustrious matron were closely interwoven with the destinies of her son. Washington ever acknowledged that he owed everything to his mother, and the education of habits of his early life. His high moral principle, his perfect self-possession, his clear and sound judgment, his inflexible resolution and untiring application were developed by her training and example. A believer in the truth of religion, she inculcated a strict obedience to its injunctions. She planted the seed and cherished the growth which bore such rich and glorious fruit. Lafayette observed that she belonged rather to the age of Sparta or Rome than to modern times. She was a mother formed on the ancient model, and by her elevation of character and matchless discipline, fitted to lay the foundation of the greatness of him who towered beyond all Greek, beyond all Roman fame. The course of Mrs. Washington's life, exhibiting her qualities of mind and heart, proved her fitness for the high trust committed to her hands. She was remarkable for her vigor and intellect, strength and resolution, and inflexible firmness wherever principle was concerned. Devoted to the education of her children, her parental government and guidance have been described by those who knew her as admirably adapted to train the youthful mind to wisdom and virtue. With her, affection was regulated by calm and just judgment. She was distinguished, moreover, by that well-marked quality of genius, a power of acquiring and maintaining influence over those with whom she associated. Without inquiring into the philosophy of the mysterious ascendancy, she was content to employ it for the noblest ends. It contributed, no doubt, to deepen the effect of her instructions. The life of Mrs. Washington, so useful in the domestic sphere, did not abound in incident. She passed through the trials of common to those who lived amid the scenes of the Revolutionary era. She saw the son whom she had taught to be good, whom she had reared in the principles of true honor, walking the perilous path of duty with firm step, leading his country to independence, and crowned with his reward, a nation's gratitude. Yet in all these changes, her simple, earnest nature remained the same. She loved to speak in her latter days of her boy's merits in his early life, and of his filial affection and duty, but never dwelt on the glory he had won as the deliverer of his country, the chief magistrate of a great republic. This was because her ambition was too high for the pride that inspires and rewards common souls. The greatness she discerned and acknowledged in the object of her solicitous tenderness was beyond that which the world most esteems. The only memoir of the mother of Washington extant is the one written by George W.P. Custis, the grandson of Martha Washington, and published more than 20 years ago in his Recollections in the National Gazette. These reminiscences were collected by him in the course of many years, and to them we are indebted for all that is known of the life and actions of this matron. According to these, she was descended from the respectable family of Ball, who came to this country and settled on the banks of the Potomac. In the old days of Virginia, women were taught habits of industry and self-reliance, and in these Mrs. Washington was nurtured. The early death of her husband involved her in the cares of a young family with limited resources, which rendered prudence and economy necessary to provide for and educate her children. Thus circumstanced, it was left to her unassisted efforts to form in her son's mind those essential qualities which gave tone and character to the subsequent life. George was only 12 years old at his father's death, and retained merely the remembrance of his person and his paternal fondness. 2 years after this event, he obtained a midshipman's warrant, but his mother opposed the plan, and the idea of entering the naval service was relinquished. The home in which Mrs. Washington resided was a sanctuary of the domestic virtues. The levity of youth was there tempered by a well-regulated restraint, and the enjoyments rational and proper for that age were indulged in with moderation. The future chief was taught the duty of obedience, and was thus prepared to command. The mother's authority never departed from her, even when her son had attained the height of his renown, for she ruled by the affection which had controlled his spirit when he needed a guardian, and she claimed a reverence next to that due to his creator. The claim he admitted, mingling the deepest respect with enthusiastic attachment and yielding to her, would be the most implicit obedience, even to the latest hours of her life. One of the associates of his juvenile years, Lawrence Washington of Chotank, thus speaks of his home, quote, I was often there with George, his playmate's schoolmate, and young man's companion. Of the mother, I was 10 times more afraid than I ever was of my own parents. She awed me in the midst of her kindness, for she was indeed truly kind, and even now, when time has whitened my locks, and I am the grandparent of a second generation, I could not behold that majestic woman without feelings it is impossible to describe. Whoever has seen that awe-inspiring air and manner, so characteristic of the father of his country, will remember the matron as she appeared the presiding genius of her well-ordered household, commanding and being obeyed. Education under such influences, it is not to be wondered at that Washington's deportment towards his mother at all times testified his appreciation of her elevated character and the excellence of her lessons. On his appointment to the commander-in-chief of the American armies, said Mr. Custis, previously to his joining the forces at Cambridge, he removed his mother from her country residence to the village of Fredericksburg, a situation remote from danger and contiguous to her friends and relatives. There she remained during nearly the whole of the trying period of the Revolution, directly in the way of the news as it passed from north to south. One courier would bring intelligence of success to our arms, another swiftly coursing at his heels, the saddening reverse of disaster and defeat. While thus ebbed and flowed the fortunes of our cause, the mother, trusting to the wisdom and protection of divine providence, preserved the even tenor of her life, affording an example to those matrons whose sons were alike engaged in the arduous contest, and showing that unavailing anxieties, however longing to nature, were unworthy of mothers whose sons were combating for the inestimable rights of man and the freedom of happiness of the world. When news arrived of the passage of the Delaware in December 1776, the mother received calmly the patriots who came in congratulations, and while expressing pleasure at the intelligence, disclaimed for her son the praises in the letters from which extracts were read. When informed by the express of the surrender of Cornwallis, she lifted her hands in gratitude towards heaven, and exclaimed, "Thank God, war will now be ended, and peace, independence, and happiness bless our country." Her housewifery, industry, and care in the management of her domestic concerns were not intermittent during the war. "She looketh well to the ways of her household, and worketh willingly with her hands," said the wise man, in describing a virtuous woman, and it was the pride of the exemplary women of that day to fill the station of mistress with usefulness as well as dignity. Mrs. Washington was remarkable for a simplicity which modern refinement might call severe, but which became, God, I'm itching really bad, but which became her not less when her fortunes were clouded, than when the sun of the glory arose upon her house. Some of the aged inhabitants of Fredericksburg long remembered the matron, as seated in an old-fashioned open chaise, she was in the habit of visiting, almost daily, her little farm in the vicinity of the town. When there, she would ride about her fields, giving her orders and seeing that they were obeyed. When on one occasion an agent departed from his instructions, she reproved him for exercising his own judgment in the matter. "I command you," she said, "there is nothing left for you but to obey." Her charity of the poor was well known, and having not wealth to distribute, it was necessary that what her benevolence dispersed should be supplied by domestic economy and industry. How peculiar a grace does this impart to the benefits flowing from a sympathizing heart. It is thus that she has been pictured in the imagination of one of the most gifted poets. And here's the poem. This is from Mrs. Sigourney in her political tribute on the occasion of laying the cornerstone for the monument. "Methinks we see thee as in olden time, simple in garb, majestic and serene, unawed by the pomp and circumstances in truth, inflexible and with a Spartan zeal. Repressing vice and making folly grave, thou didst not deem it woman's part to waste life in inglorious sloth to sport a while amid the flowers around the summit wave, then fleet like the ephemeron away, building no temple in her children's hearts, save to the vanity and the pride of life, which she had worshipped." Mr. Custis states that she was continually visited and solaced in the retirement of her declining years by her children and numerous grandchildren. Her daughter, Mrs. Lewis, repeatedly and earnestly solicited her to remove to her house and there pass the remainder of her days. Her son pressingly entreated her that she would make Mount Vernon the home of her old age. But the matron's answer was, "I thank you for your affections and dutiful offers, but my wants are few in this world, and I feel perfectly competent to take care of myself." To the proposition of her son-in-law, Colonel Lewis, to relieve her by taking the direction of her concerns, she replied, "Do you, Fielding, keep my books in order, for your eyesight is better than mine, but leave the executive management to me." Such were the energy and independence she preserved to an age beyond that usually allotted to mortals, until within 3 years of the death, when the disease under which she suffered, cancer of the breast, prevented exertion. Her meeting with Washington after the victory which decided the fortune of America illustrates her character too strikingly to be omitted. Quote, "After an absence of nearly 7 years, it was, at the length, on the return of the combined armies from Yorktown, permitted to the mother again to see and embrace her illustrious son. So soon as he had dismounted in the midst of numerous and brilliant suite, he sent to apprise her of his arrival, and to know when it would be her pleasure to receive him. And now, mark the force of early education and habits, and the superiority of the Spartan over the Persian schools. In this interview of the great Washington with his admirable parent and instructor, no pageantry of war proclaimed his coming, no trumpets sounded, no banners waved. Alone and on foot, the Marshal of France, the General-in-Chief of the combined armies of France and America, the deliverer of his country, the hero of the age, repaired to pay his humble duty to her, whom he venerated as the author of his being, the founder of his fortune and his fame. For full well he knew that the matron was made of sterner stuff than to be moved by all the pride that glory ever gave, and by all the pomp and circumstance of power. The lady was alone, her aged hands employed in the works of domestic industry, when the good news was announced, and it was further told that the Victory Chief was in waiting at the threshold. She welcomed him with a warm embrace, and by the well-remembered and endearing names of his childhood, inquiring as to his health. She remarked the lines which mighty cares and many trials had made on his manly countenance, spoke much of old times and of old friends, but of his glory not one word. Quote, "Meantime, in the village of Fredericksburg, all was joy and revelry. The town was crowded with the officers of the French and American armies, and with gentlemen from all the country around, who hastened to welcome the conquerors of Cornwallis. The citizens made arrangements for a splendid ball, to which the mother of Washington was specially invited. She observed that although her dancing days were pretty well over, she should feel happy to contribute to the general festivity, and consented to attend. The foreign officers were anxious to see the mother of their chief. They had heard indistinct rumors respecting her remarkable life and character, but forming their judgment from European examples, they were prepared to expect in the mother that glare and show which would have been attached to the parents of the great in the old world. How were they surprised when the matron, leaning on the arm of her son, entered the room. She was arrayed in a very plain yet becoming garb worn by the Virginia lady of the olden time. Her address, always dignified and imposing, was courteous, though reserved. She received the complimentary attentions which were profusely paid to her without evincing the slightest elevation, and at an early hour, wishing the company much enjoyment of their pleasures, and observing that it was time for old people to be at home, retired, leaning as before on the arm of her son. Okay, that's going to do it for today, and I will be back on Thursday, the 4th of July, to read some more about to read some more, and fascinating read. So we'll see. So we'll continue this on the 4th. Tomorrow now, our old friend Dan Herrera is going to be with us. We're going to be talking about UFOs, alien abductions, and contactees. So be ready for that. That'll be our usual time at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. I hope to see you there. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We are equal opportunity here at California Haunts Radio, and we're just trying to get the word out. All right, guys, I will see you tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific, with Dan Herrera. Have a great evening.